What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show. It's the matchup edition. One might call it the marathon edition. I'm Dave Loughran, and we've got a lot to talk about today. A 12-game slate coming up for Week 5. Very possibly an 11-game slate, but we're going to approach everything in the event or under the assumption that, guess what? Everyone is going to play. Probably not going to be the case, but we can't leave any stone unturned. We've got a big slate to touch on going into the 5th week of the season. Man, this stuff goes so quickly. Such a shame it'll be over before we know it. And my co-host, Matt Savoca, joining me today for the 5th straight week, every single Thursday. We're going to look back, Matt. It's going to be week 17, and we're going to say, where did the time go?
Oh, absolutely. It's already going so fast for us. And you know what? Like, there is so much in the real world going on and so much in the football logistics world that I am so glad that smarter people have to figure out other than me. And we get to just talk about these games. And yeah, I'm ready to roll. Let's do it. Marathon day.
See it, man. We provide a respite and an escape from the real world, right? Like, that's our job. That's why it pisses me off when you get people on here, they start talking politics. Shit, I love talking politics. Not here. There's no need for that, man. Nobody's tuning in to hear your or my political opinion. Maybe some people, but
you never know. You never know.
I did enough of that during quarantine. Twitter was an absolute hellacious, shitty place to be. It still is.
And now it's perfect. Now it's absolutely a serene place.
It was an absolute cesspool, a wasteland between March and July. I mean, I can't tell you how often I would just tell myself I'm not going on there. And then I would go on there and get real pissed off about stuff. But that's how the world works, isn't it? Anyway.
People need this. That's what they need right now.
Damn right people need this. So let's jump into it. We've got a lot to talk about here. 12 games. We're happy to have all of you guys with us, as always. Seeing some of the same names in chat that we normally do. Our boy El Negro Loco in there moderating things. John Musto, what's up, baby? Val, we got some guys that are coming in and hanging out as they do every day. So let's give them a show, Matt. Kick it off with Arizona and the New York Jets. I want to start on the Arizona side of the ball for one very specific reason, and that reason is David Johnson. You're talking about someone that, alongside Kenyon Drake, both of whom have been relatively chalky through the start of the season, have been massively disappointing. The Cardinals, I'm sorry, what did I say? David Johnson.
You did say David Johnson.
Kenyon Drake. You know what I
mean. Yes.
They're synonymous at this point, aren't they? Kenyon Drake and his Cardinals are they have a 27-point implied total here. They're 7.5-point road favorites with a 46.5-point total against the Jets team who, if you look at the metrics, the run defense has been stout, but that's because they've been absolutely decimated through the air. And now you've got Kyler Murray coming in off of a loss. He's definitely shown some warts this year. I think what we're seeing overall is impressive, but there's no denying that there have still been some growing pains in his second season alongside Cliff Kingsbury, especially that loss to Carolina last week and consecutive losses with a loss at home to the Detroit Lions last week after starting the season 2-0. So nevertheless, your thoughts here, Kyler Murray, and maybe we started actually with Kenyon Drake, who has been very popular again, but has not been able to pull it off no matter how good the matchup has been through the first 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. And part of that is he's not getting receiving work. That's really all going to Chase Edmonds. And, you know, one thing we do need to mention is that Kenyon Drake got banged up at the end of week 4. The team is saying he got the wind knocked out of him. It's a minor chest injury. But they also called up a running back from their practice squad and Jonathan Ward. So that's definitely something to monitor as we head towards the weekend. Yeah, it's been really tough to watch. I mean, Kenyon Drake has been kind of a chalky play for the last few weeks, especially early on there. But the bottom line is the Cardinals' offense as a whole is underperforming and underwhelming. They're still bottom 5 in net expected points and expected points on offense, and they're only slightly overperforming that in expected points added per play. They're about league average. So what we've been seeing on the highlight reel is these spectacular runs from Kyler Murray, and we still kind of had that taste of their 2-0 start. But at this point, they're kind of a mediocre team that isn't passing the ball well. And it certainly doesn't help when Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins are barely able to suit up and play. They weren't 100% last week at all.
No, they weren't. And you have to question what type of game script we see here. I'm not overly worried about that, but I'm not going into this game with the assumption that it goes one way or the other, quite frankly. I know Joe Flacco will likely be at the helm for the New York Jets with Sam Darnold dealing with that AC joint sprain. By the way, credit him for gutting that out. I've had that injury twice, skateboarding and snowboarding, and it really hurts. Like it's definitely painful. I can imagine being an NFL quarterback and having to deal with something like that. It's really difficult. So he's already been ruled out of this game. He was originally questionable, wanted to play, then doubtful. Now he's out. How do you? I don't want to ask how you see this game going, but who are you, if anybody, attracted to in this one, knowing that you've got someone like DeAndre Hopkins, who you just touched on a little bit. The secondary for the New York Jets has been really in shambles. You look at someone like Desir. He had that pick six, I think it was, against Ripon. I don't know if it was a pick six, but he definitely picked him off. Might have been a pick six, right? Was it?
Yeah, I think they got a defensive score.
Yeah. You have him who really, outside of that, had some terrible busted coverage, blown assignments, really got himself into trouble. DeAndre Hopkins likely going to see a lot of Austin, who grades out terribly on Pro Football Focus. Overall, these guys have been well below average as a unit. What's the best way to attack the New York Jets?
Well, I still think fundamentally we're looking at a team that's probably going to be losing in the Jets, which means that we often are playing the running backs from a team that is expected to be ahead in the second half. So that's why people are going to go back to the well on Drake. I was checking the ownership projections on Awesemo.com. He's up at 11.3%. That's 9th on the slate. So people are obviously going back to the well, and his projection lines up right around there. I think it's about 10th among running backs on Awesemo.com this weekend. One of the places I might look is Edmonds, though. Edmonds has been getting the more valuable receiving work, especially if you're playing on DraftKings with the full PPR.
Drake wasn't targeted once last week.
Exactly.
Playing from behind.
It really has been split between Edmonds in passing situations and Drake in rushing situations. And in full PPR, I'm usually leading the running back that's catching the passes. So I'm trying to read the tea leaves here, and them calling up a running back is a little bit of a red flag for me, and that Drake is just not 100% either. The other thing I was noticing, and you're going to hear me reference this stat a lot this week because it gets a little bit more stable once we get 4 weeks of data, is fantasy points over opponent average, which completely disregards the average points and just looks at the plus or minus related to that a defense is giving up. And I'm noticing that wide receiver threes are having a field day against the Jets, and that's in terms of pricing. So we could be looking at Andy Isabella, possibly Larry Fitzgerald, who hasn't found the end zone yet. These are like off the radar plays. We're talking about less than 1% own, but I'm not sure if I'm going to the chalk and Drake again. And same with Murray. He's down in the 9th QB in ownership, but I don't think he's going to have to push the tempo, and I think they're going to lean on the run, which Arizona does more than we would think in this air raid style.
Kenyon Drake, among all running backs with at least 15 carries, is almost at the bottom in terms of yards after contact per attempt. And I think that's concerning to me because he has been getting the volume. He's done nothing with it. And the lack of passing down work is equally concerning to me. I guess if I get to some of him, I'm okay with it. But really, the only way I want to get to Drake at this point is if his ownership comes in the single digits. Like that's kind of my issue here. I don't think he's going to be chalky, but I definitely have some concerns that we're going to continue not getting what we need from him. DeAndre Hopkins, on the other hand, has fallen below 8K. I have legitimate interest there. I think Kyler Murray, while I'm not interested in a real stack in this spot, could really carve them up. Somebody asked in chat, how would you deal with a game stack in this spot? Well, I think one way as we make the transition over to the Jets, Matt, would be Jamison Crowder. I don't know if it matters who's at quarterback. Jamison Crowder He's actually shown he's looked really good through his first 2 weeks, even again, or he was injured in 2, but through his 2 games, even against Denver, getting open on almost every route that he ran, making it easy on his quarterback. He's now holding 7 receptions in both games, double-digit targets and 100+ yards in both. And he's also seen some deeper targets than usual, and he's broken off a decent amount of yards after the catch. What are your thoughts on the Jets here, starting with Jamison Crowder?
Yeah, I actually like Jamison Crowder again. If you look at some of his weighted opportunity metrics, they're really off the charts. And part of that is because we only have a 2-game sample, but he's top 10 in true weighted opportunity rating. And that involves sample size in its calculation. So it obviously really likes him there. And there's nobody close in terms of target share or air yard share on the Jets. So that's the first run it back option that everyone is going to be looking at. And he's still only coming in at 6.7% own. That's our projection. That's wide receiver 19. One thing I was looking up is how often he might see Patrick Peterson lined up across from him. And I really don't see it happening all that often. Patrick Peterson lines up in the slot about 15% of the time. Jamison Crowder's in the slot over 80% of the time. So they're just not going to see each other on the field that often unless Arizona decides to blanket him in coverage, which honestly I wouldn't blame at this point, because some of these players, I wouldn't be mad at you if you had never heard of Jeff Smith or even Braxton Berrios, who we brought up, or Josh Malone, some of these players who are getting playing time. So it's really hard to trust a Jet with Joe Flacco at this point in his career. I had this terrible thought on Thursday night that I said to myself, oh my gosh, Frank Gore's their best running back.
It's bad.
It's really happening. So, that leaves a little hope for Le'Veon Bell in that, maybe he can outplay Frank Gore. But Kalen Ballage got cut. That tells you probably more about Bell's health than anything else. But, boy, maybe there's some contrarian play where you play Bell thinking he gets a lot of receptions in comeback mode and he's healthy enough to do it. But I'm not looking at Berrios or Smith or Hogan. I'm just not that kind of contrarian player, I guess.
Yeah, look, there's a big difference between contrarian and dumb, right? And I think to some extent you have to be able to draw the line. Like I said, I don't mind at least talking about someone like Jamison Crowder, knowing that he is the most reliable weapon on this team by far. Le'Veon Bell is an interesting one at 5,100. I know it's really ugly, but if he plays, do you think he gets a full workload, or would you think that he's eased back into it?
I think he gets eased back in. That said, if there's a talent gap, maybe at a certain point in the game getting out of hand, they just let him run the second half and get his body back in shape. I'm not seeing that as the most likely option, and neither are the Awesemo.com projections. They have him ranked down in the 40s, even though his price, for Le'Veon Bell, it's kind of jarring. He's only 5,100 on Draftkings. That's the 24th highest running back on the slate. But he still needs a 15-point game for that 3x value that we're looking for. And I'm having trouble seeing a 15-point game from a Jets running back.
Fair enough. I like him a little bit more than you do. Joe Flacco targeted his running backs in Denver last year almost 30% of the time. And with limited opportunities or limited weapons, at the pass catching spots, at the other skill positions, I do think there's a possibility that Le'Veon Bell gets there on sheer volume alone. At 5,100, it's a spot I'm at least willing to consider. And again, Joe Flacco has never been hesitant to target his running backs in the passing game. It's just a matter of whether or not Adam Gase really wants to keep running Frank Gore out there. And that's the biggest concern. Is he want to, I don't understand what the infatuation is with these coaches and Frank Gore, but he's been completely inefficient. And we'll see again. That's my biggest worry. But if I sprinkled in a little bit of Le'Veon Bell at 5,100, I'm not totally opposed to it. Now, we get to a game that's far more appealing from a fantasy standpoint, and it will not go overlooked. It's going to be ridiculously popular. That's Carolina and Atlanta. You knew this was coming. They were going to be chalky. I'm talking about legitimately chalky here. Mike Davis, 36% projected ownership. DJ Moore at 23%. Robbie Anderson, Gurley, Calvin Ridley, Bridgewater, all of them north of 10%. So you've got 6 guys alone in the double digits. Matt Ryan creeping up there at 9.7. They're going to be chalky for very good reason. This game is projected to see a ton of scoring, Matt. Both defenses have struggled. Atlanta is just decimated in the secondary. I think they were down to their 8th safety last game. And they're going to be forced to throw the football a decent amount, I would assume. I will say Carolina's run defense and their defense in general has been better than I thought. Now, that just means that I had very, very low expectations. But at the same time, they haven't been quite as bad as I anticipated. Nevertheless, a lot of good options from this game, especially with the assumption that Julio Jones sits this one out.
Yeah, that's what it's looking like. He left in the second quarter of the Atlanta-Green Bay game on Monday night, and he just didn't look right at all, even though he was still getting peppered with targets while Ridley couldn't catch anything. We'll get there in a minute. But, I mean, I was looking at the ownership projections for this game, and it just, you just have to comment on the general intelligence of the field that's playing NFL DFS at this point. It looks like DJ Moore's ownership is coming in at wide receiver 1, when the production has certainly shown him to be the wide receiver 2 compared to Robbie Anderson. But then if you look underneath the hood and you look at true target share, true air yard share, weighted opportunity rating, of course DJ Moore is the wide receiver 1, and that's what we're seeing in ownership. It really just speaks to the level of the field that you're playing against. Now, getting back into the game, it does look like DJ Moore as a value is the 16th highest salary wide receiver on the slate. He's projected way above that in terms of median projection on Awesemo.com. But wide receiver 1 in terms of ownership is getting a little bit out of hand, I think. And I think, an obvious pivot is just Robbie Anderson, who's had more production. If you look at his yak or yards created for wide receivers, I mean, Robbie Anderson is basically the most efficient wide receiver in the league right now. In receiver air conversion ratio, or RACER, as it's often called, he's 11th among wide receivers. I think it's hard to move away from him, but it's not like his ownership is low. It's down at the 4th wide receiver. He's 17%.
Yeah, and if you're talking about yards per route run, as far as anyone with 20-plus targets goes, or more than 20 targets goes, he is number 1 in the league with 2.86 yards per route run. He's really creating, man. And he's also a big difference between him and DJ Moore is he's been converting far more of his targets into actual receptions, where DJ Moore has struggled, not struggled. Robbie Anderson's just been fantastic in that respect. Yeah. I do get both of them, though. And I think there's an element here of, well, DJ Moore has to blow up soon. I've been rostering him for the last 4 weeks. I don't want to jump off the moment he has that big game, right? I think there's going to be a lot of people thinking that way too. And that's crept into my mind as well. I was very high on Robbie Anderson last week, talked about him being the one of the better pivots of the week. And he didn't let us down. He wasn't spectacular, but he came 1 yard shy of the 100-yard bonus, was targeted 11 times and hauled in 8 receptions. I like both of these guys, quite frankly. Robbie Anderson a little bit more just because early in this season, he has been more productive. And it's not like he's been more productive just because he's catching more passes and isn't getting the same target share. No, him and DJ Moore essentially have the exact same target share on the year. So
that's right.
There's really a lot to like about Robbie Anderson. Entirely different wide receiver than he was in New York, and I'm on it. Mike Davis being another option here. I don't think any of us assumed that in week 5 of the 2020 season, he would be somebody that's 6,400 and the chalkiest player on the slate. But here we are, Matt. He's now seen, this is pretty incredible, 22 looks last game, so total opportunities, rushing attempts and targets. The game before that, he saw 22. So 16 attempts, 6 targets, 13 attempts, 9 targets. He's involved in both phases of the offense. He's been heavily used in spots against the Chargers in Arizona, and now he faces a banged-up Atlanta defense. I do get the ownership here.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the biggest thing is that he's the 10th highest running back in terms of salary, and he's fundamentally mispriced. If I told you in week 5 of the NFL season that the Carolina Panthers running back was number 2 in weighted opportunity among running backs and number 1 in efficiency on those air yards that he got, you would say, okay, great, Christian McCaffrey's having another good year. So we're paying running back 10 price for essentially in this offense is Christian McCaffrey. Nothing against McCaffrey's talent whatsoever. Do I think McCaffrey is a better player? Yes, I think he's more talented, but the usage is there, the efficiency is there, and certainly the matchup is there. I mean, I honestly felt bad for the Falcons getting toyed with by Aaron Rodgers in the second half because they were down so many defensive backs, and some of them, they're not coming back. Kazee was lost for the year with the Achilles injury. I was seeing an analysis on Twitter yesterday about Deion Jones not being anywhere near the same player he was at his best. So, I mean, I just completely understand where we're at this point. It's just a bizarre world that it's Mike Davis.
It is. And it's a world that I'm all right living in, at least for now. The Atlanta side of the ball, Julio Jones, I think we're both assuming he won't be active in this game. Never returned, as you pointed out, from that injury in the second quarter. Calvin Ridley, that was ugly, man. But nobody's been targeted more on deep passes than he has. It's an important stat for DFS, right? Because you're really trying to get guys that have that slate breaking upside. And Calvin Ridley has absolutely all of that. He's going to have some bad games, as we saw last time out, against by the way, a good Green Bay secondary. He also had a drop in the end zone that should count for something. But 13 targets on balls of 20-plus yards downfield. Amazingly, only 5 receptions because 6 have been catchable. But his deep percentage is 37%. He leads the league in air yards by a mile. There's just a lot of reasons to look at someone like Calvin Ridley and say, yeah, if he had a 200-yard, 3-touchdown game, it wouldn't shock me.
No, not at all. And we're going to have to start talking about Jair Alexander-Island at a certain point because he's running away with PFF's coverage grade #1 rating. He is 5 points higher, and it's a scale out of 100. So you're talking about essentially 5% better than the next best cornerback right now. You know that's probably going to regress a little bit, but we can take a little bit away from Calvin Ridley's 0-point game last week in that he's still 7th in true weighted opportunity rating. And this matchup is entirely different when we're talking about the Carolina Panthers defense. Now, they have been a little bit easier on the ground in terms of fantasy points over opponent average on the ground. Running backs are really tearing them up. And we'll get to Todd Gurley in a minute, but he was fantastic, even though the yardage didn't show it. The possibility of a big game for him is there as well. I like Calvin Ridley about the same as the field, it looks like. He's a wide receiver 7 right now in projected ownership, and I like where that's at for him this week. I'm not sure I'm going to be above that 13.7%, but it's definitely a matchup he can exploit easily. I think there are slightly better ways or more contrarian ways I might play this.
Marty S. says, in all caps, it was thrown short and knocked out of his hands. Assuming we're talking about Calvin Ridley. Marty, take it up with Pro Football Focus, man. I'm just reading the numbers. Anyway, Todd Gurley just hasn't looked good. And I
want to counter that for a minute. I'm sorry to cut you off, Dave. But I actually saw on his touchdown run, I said, wow, Todd Gurley just broke 3 tackles on that touchdown run.
He's a different back in the red zone. I don't care what anyone says, man. Get him inside the 20-yard line, and he looks entirely different.
He actually had the highest run grade on PFF that he's had since week 6 of 2018. And I was actually reading another analysis this week that says PFF's one of their great strengths is isolating running back ability from running back blocking ability. And it looks like Todd Gurley is really he's really struggling because of his offensive line is really what it's at. He broke 8 tackles last week, which was the most he's done since 2018. So I'm not faulting him here, and his projection actually looks okay at running back 16 with a running back 18 salary on the slate. I actually think I might have a little bit more than him than the 14.2% this week.
Yeah, and you certainly have more interest in him than I do. Look, I credit the broken tackles. I watch them as well. I really do believe that this guy, I don't know what it is, but watch him inside the red zone. Once he sniffs that goal line, he looks like an entirely different player, man. He got tackled. How many times did he get tackled for loss last game? You can credit that to the offensive line and run blocking. Sure. I have some general concerns. He's been targeted 3 times in the passing game over the last 3 weeks. That to me limits his upside in a league where a lot of running backs are targeted abundantly. And overall, if it is the run blocking or if it is Todd Gurley, the results are all the same. But I get what you're saying. 54.5 point total. I'm not going to fault you for wanting to go there at that price point. What are your thoughts on the rest of this team, whether it be Hayden Hurst, Russell Gage, or someone else?
Yeah, I guess we have to say Alamade Zaccheaus' name, which is not easy to do. But I did see that he led the team in receiving yards and actually, it was weirdly got the most targets, but he ended up having 86 yards, which led the team on Monday night. He's a second-year undrafted wide receiver out of Virginia. His profile, he seems pretty athletic, but I really don't think we're looking there. One thing I also noticed is that once Julio Jones left the game, they had 2 problems for the Falcons did. They were getting torn apart on defense, and their passing game was continually going 3 and out if they kept passing at the rate that they usually like to. So they almost leaned on Todd Gurley to slow the game down, even though they were down big, which is really not a good sign if you're hoping the Falcons are going to win a lot of games. But here it is a little bit of a different matchup. I'm not opposed to going towards Gage or Zaccheaus if Julio sits. They're hard to bet on. Zaccheaus is down at the 82nd highest wide receiver price. He's $3K, so he's a min price option that you could possibly pivot to. But he's already at 5% ownership, so it's not like others aren't there either.
Zaccheaus $3,000 on DraftKings. There could be something there. It's tough. I don't know. That would strictly be the fact that he's the dead man, and you're hoping that from a PPR standpoint he can get it done. Also, I don't know how much he's going to be looked at in a game where Atlanta probably isn't playing behind 3 touchdowns early on. But yeah, he's minimum salary. What was he targeted 9 times last game or something like that? So
yeah, he was the only one open in that Packers for that Packers defense. Essentially, they let him beat them, and they didn't. And
they'll let you do that all day long. Let's talk Washington and Rams. I don't imagine we'll spend too much time here. I do think there are some intriguing points, though, specifically somebody like Antonio Gibson. He continues to get more work. He's essentially taken over backfield duties in terms of rushing attempts. And he's been targeted less than I would like. He's not running as many routes as I would prefer. I'd also caution you, if you're looking at J.D. McKissic and saying, oh, well, he's stealing a lot of opportunities because of his snaps at the running back position, a lot of those snaps are as a wide receiver, or as a receiver, sorry. But Antonio Gibson in a tough matchup against Baltimore was effective. He is somebody that can break big plays and be used in both phases of the offense. He's $5,000. What are you doing with him in Washington?
Yeah, I really like Antonio Gibson. And, it's hard to compare running backs who are in really different situations because running backs are so situation dependent. But if you look at the elusiveness ratings on Pro Football Focus and you look at it compared to the number of touches he's had all year, his closest comparable player is Kareem Hunt, and the next one is Nick Chubb. So the thought experiment you can do is, what would you think of Kareem Hunt on Washington? And the answer is not as much as we think of Kareem Hunt on Cleveland, but it's not that far different. And then when we talk about it, his salary this week, priced at running back 25, now he gets really intriguing even in this matchup that doesn't look great for running backs. At 3% ownership, that's running back 15 and a $5,000 salary on DraftKings. I really like the amount of usage you're going to get at that price. It's not the prettiest matchup, but I do think that the Rams defense is still a little bit overrated in terms of expected points. And they're basically going off the Jalen Ramsey effect. The rest of their defense isn't that effective. And by the way, Jalen Ramsey's PFF grades are middle of the road this year. So I obviously think the most likely scenario is that Washington is playing from behind. So it is a little bit of a concern that McKissick's going to get more run. But like you said, it's from the slot, not necessarily from the running back position. They're playing multiple backs very often. At the same time, you're still talking about a Washington running back against the Rams. So just measure your expectations even as I talk him up.
Yeah, I think we both like him, but there's also the concern here that they're just a very bad football team. And I don't really understand the Kyle Allen move, quite frankly. Dwayne Haskins has had very limited options to target, and they're playing from behind quite often. And now you bring in a guy that we already know what you're getting from him. I don't see really any redeeming qualities about Kyle Allen that weren't there with Dwayne Haskins.
I'll tell you what's happening. I'm sorry. I grew up in the Washington area, and my fed upness is going to show up a little bit. But they're in contention in the middle of October, which feels like them being in contention in the middle of December. So they think they need to make a change because they're near first place.
They're not in contention. I mean,
I don't make those rules, but I think you're right.
Are they technically in contention? Like, yeah, the division's terrible, sure, but let's not kid ourselves. I get what you're saying though, but I can't come along for that ride. What are your thoughts on Terry McLaurin? Any interest?
Oh, he's just incredible. If anyone can overcome a quarterback controversy, I guess we'll call it, it's Terry McLaurin. He was questionable coming into the week with the thigh injury. He certainly didn't look injured. If you look at the play-by-play in terms of expected points added, the best play of the game by far was Terry McLaurin's over-the-shoulder 37-yard catch. It was the most efficient play in terms of expected points added, as I mentioned. He's really the best player on the team by a country mile. And at wide receiver 15, he is starting to creep up there into the elite wide receiver range on a team that is, frankly, a mess. But I think you're going to see a little bit lower ownership. He's projected, I see it's 6.3%. That's 22nd on the slate. That's probably fair, but it's not to McLaurin based on his ability, based on his talent. We just don't think that the touchdowns are going to be there, and that's what we need for wide receivers to win us a tournament. So is he the worst person to bet on? Absolutely never. Is he hard because he's on Washington? Every week, yes.
On the other side of this one, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, a run game that is a full-out committee at this point, at this stage of the game. Darrell Henderson burned a lot of people last week, 8 for 22. Meanwhile, Malcolm Brown wasn't that much better, but he had 9 for 37. He was targeted 6 times in the passing game. It's really muddy waters in this LA Rams backfield. And now you've got Cam Akers practicing in a limited capacity yesterday. It's possible that he returns this week in some capacity itself. I don't really know how at similar price points with Henderson and Brown that we can confidently get to these either one of these guys, unless we're saying, you know what, I'm just going to operate under the assumption that McVay goes with the hot hand and someone does get hot, and I'll take my shots there. Aside from that, there's no real good way to gauge who's going to get the lion's share of touches from week to week right now before the game begins.
Yeah, and it's annoying because it's probably going to be a good place where we would like to play a running back in a plus matchup where they're probably going to be ahead in the second half. But like you said, this is probably turning into a three-headed monster again with Cam Akers. And another thing that I just want to mention is that we really might see one of these people blow up, but figuring out who it is the hardest part here. I was looking at PFF's net grade advantages, and it looks like the Rams have the top run advantage on the slate. And when you talk about game script, again, this looks like a really good spot. I was one of those people burned by Darrell Henderson last week. I was overweight on him. And now it looks like his ownership is going to be incredibly low. It doesn't look like he's going to even see 1% ownership. So it might be one of those things where the Rams like him a lot more than the field likes him simply because of recency bias. I still think that if we look, I want to continue using the priors that we had about Cam Akers going into the season, which is we thought he was the most talented back. And we saw that he started both games 1 and 2 as that first primary back on early downs. That said, it's really hard to trust a player, a rookie that we really haven't seen a lot from, coming back from a rib injury, which leads us to the passing game. But that's hard because it's so low volume. It passes one of the lowest rates in the league, one of the lowest ADOTs in the league. So again, you're really hoping to pick out touchdowns here, and they're not supposed to be a lot of them in this low total game.
It's been particularly frustrating trying to figure out what to do with the LA Rams passing game this year. It really is. I mentioned I had the under 5.5 receptions for Robert Woods prop last game. He finishes with 6. And what did he have, like 26 yards or something?
Right, like nothing.
Absurd. Like, okay, James Bradbury, he had 6 for 7, 35 yards. So generally speaking, it's a complete wash of a game, right? And Bradbury is one of those guys that can make your life very difficult. I have an immense amount of respect for him in the secondary, especially in shadow coverage. But yeah, of course, he had 6 for 37, just completely useless.
And really what that tells you is that the Rams, as we know, are a run-oriented team, and they like to use Woods essentially as a run extension.
Yeah.
They use him in a low A-dot situation in these screen plays. They get him out at space. That's technically a pass, but really in terms of game flow and game script, it's really more of a running play.
It certainly is. I'm just looking at it right now, filtering by the Rams targets, and target share, Kupp 24%, Woods 22, Higbee 13, actually 12.8 as a matter of fact, only 15 targets on the year. Really disappointing stuff, especially given the fact that Higbee's been very involved as someone that is going to operate his best in the red zone. He's already scored 3 touchdowns on the season, yet all of them came in one game, Matt. So Higbee was a guy that a lot of people had much faith in, but you talk ADOT, it's insane. Higbee 6.6, Kupp 5.6, Woods 4.5. It's guys like Reynolds and Jefferson that are up there in the double digits, but they're very infrequently targeted. So honestly, against this Washington team where I don't think Goff is going to be forced to throw a ton, I'm probably staying away from it. And if you had Cooper Kupp last week, I had the over 62 yards total. Was very happy to get that 55-yard touchdown, but for a while there, he had 3 for 9. And I think it goes to show that I'm willing to look back at some mistakes that I've potentially made and say, for now, especially in matchups like this where I don't think they're going to be playing with a deficit, I'm not really that interested in trying to figure out who's going to have 5 for 36 yards.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing I will say is that Tyler Higbee does lead the team, or is tied for the lead in red zone target percentage. So if you are looking for that touchdown, a team leader in red zone target percentage isn't the worst place to look in a team that's supposed to be favored. We still like home favorites for tight ends, a little bit less high of a correlation than running backs, but we still like that spot. But again, you're really picking out touchdowns here in a low total game. Good luck to you if you want to do it.
Agree with you on Higbee about that. Last year, in those final 6 games where Gerald Everett was hurt for some and Higbee, came on strong, he finished the entire season leading all tight ends along with Travis Kelce in red zone targets, and almost every single one of those targets came over the final 6 games of the season. So they're no doubt they are very much willing to use him there, but are they willing to use him in between the 20s? And so far, he just hasn't been. And they're loving this committee approach. They've also had some pretty decent matchups as well. Buffalo, Tennessee. Hit that thumbs up, by the way, if you haven't done so yet. You guys know how much it helps us here on the show to continue to put out free content. Getting the interaction and helping navigate around that YouTube algorithm is really, really helpful to us. Subscribe and hit that notification bell as well. Only 40% or so of people that actually watch these videos are subscribed. So, join the community, hit that subscription button. And if you don't like it, well, we'll refund your misery. All you have to do is come back and click that button one more time and you will be unsubscribed. It's that simple, but why not give it a shot? Try some new things out in your life. Buffalo and Tennessee, Matt. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this game, so let's just do a quick take. The reason for this being you had more positive tests in Tennessee today. I'm really questioning how accurate this shit is at this point. Like, I'm really getting. I'm not concerned yet. It's like a 19.
Are you suggesting that the NFL might hold information or possibly even lie?
Yes, but is that possible? Yes, but that's actually not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that I'm not necessarily sure the quality of these tests at this point. Like, I don't know. as far as the veracity goes of the testing, you know that they're frequently testing players, and then you got shit coming back inconclusive, and then positive, and then this, and then that, and then Stephon Gilmore. I don't know. Whatever. Again, I don't want to get into all of that, but
above our pay grade. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's only human to speculate about this, since it feels like it's spiraling a little bit. But I don't know. There's not much else to say other than that.
Yeah, I'm not too worried though. The league's worth like $18 billion or something absurd. They're going to do everything they can to play football games.
Exactly.
That's my general view. But I do think Buffalo, Tennessee is at least in jeopardy of not playing on this main slate, Matt. So what I'll ask you to do, and I'll shut up, is just give me, if it does play, give me your favorite plays from each side. I'll say I still really like Derrick Henry. Amazingly, he is only $7,000 on DraftKings. I get that he doesn't have high pass volume, but Buffalo's run defense has actually not been that stout when you look at it by the numbers. And on the other side, Josh Allen's been spectacular. Tennessee's secondary has been lackluster at best. So pairing him with someone like Stefon Diggs is never something I'm against. Go ahead.
Yeah, so like you said, this is a mess of a situation, probably not on the main slate, but how I might look at things as a contrarian standpoint is looking to stack Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown, who, if they do play, is expected back. We got Adam Humphries on the COVID list. We have Corey Davis now on the COVID list. A.J. Brown absolutely tore up defenses last year in a Rookie of the Year style campaign. And he's been dealing with this bone bruise in his knee that apparently was good to go in week 4 had they been playing. So a Tannehill, A.J. Brown stack when there's so little volume other than Brown and Jonnu Smith, that might be a way to go. I joked to myself when it looked as if this game might get postponed, as it very well may. I said, oh, good, this is going to save me from being overweight on Derrick Henry and his touchdown dependency. Because I do think there are going to be points in this game. The Tennessee Titans are a little bit, in my opinion, their identity is a little bit misconstrued. They are absolutely this run-first, run-oriented team. They're perfectly willing to give Derrick Henry upwards of 30-plus touches a game. But when you look at their pace and their air yards on early downs, I like to just do a quick division and do air yards per second. They're actually one of the highest rated teams in the league, up there with the Bengals and Joe Burrow, who's slinging it all over the place on early downs, and someone like Matt Stafford and the Lions, who is well known for taking shots, particularly on early downs in neutral situations. So assuming this game stays close, I think a lot of people would be on Derrick Henry, just assuming he's getting the rock all the time. But the volume should be consolidated. So Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown or Jonnu Smith or both might be really interesting plays, and then running it back with someone like Diggs or Brown or rookie Gabriel Davis on the Buffalo side, who has had some really nice performances over the last few weeks. We're going to see... I actually was surprised at the ownership level for Josh Allen. I think that has to do with most people already projecting that this is going away from the slate. But right now he's only 11th in ownership, while he's about 3rd in salary. So that might be an interesting leverage point. And then I don't know if you're playing the running backs, unless Moss is a sit. He's a sit candidate again. He was a late inactive last week, and so a lot of people pivoted to Singletary for the afternoon games. That could happen again. He still could be a game time decision.
Last year, Josh Allen averaged 0.56 fantasy points per dropback. This year, he leads the league with 0.78, which is an insane number. He's just been overall outstanding across the board. And if you wanted to get to him and stack him with Stefon Diggs and even run it, honestly, like, even if you ran it back with Derrick Henry, I get the feel of that is a little bit uncomfortable because it could suggest this game is a little bit slower, but you could run it back with A.J. Brown too. There are ways to actually look at this game and have some interest in it. The problem is it's so hard to believe it plays. It's still off the board pretty much everywhere as far as I've seen. So as of now, that's our analysis on it. We'll assume it plays, but I think we all know it probably won't, at least not on Sunday. So in just, 10 seconds, Matt, favorite players from this game?
Yeah, just to add one thing to your Josh Allen take there, his real ability has not necessarily been in his per play efficiency, but he's finishing drives. That's so important, obviously, in the NFL to get a touchdown on your drives, and he's 5th in true drive success rate. That's just so important for his team. But I also saw that he has an 8% pass TD rate, which is probably unsustainable. It certainly is over a career. We might see it over the course of one season, one special season, which means that Josh Allen might be in the midst of one. He's okay to bet on. Again, I'm liking the opposite side here. If it plays, I'm a big A.J. Brown fan, and his Awesemo.com projection is a lot nicer than his wide receiver 24 salary.
Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. I have virtually zero interest in this game. Nothing on the Philadelphia side appeals to me. Pittsburgh defensively is arguably the best in the league. And on the other side, so here's the thing. If you're talking about the Pittsburgh side of the ball, Philadelphia's run defense would be their one true asset where they can do a pretty good job of stymieing opposing backs. So there's that. Once you get past that and you look towards their secondary, Darius Slay can make an impact, and I believe he will against Deontay Johnson. That isn't to say that he's a complete fade, but it does kind of funnel potentially targets to Juju Smith-Schuster against Roby Coleman, who's been garbage this season, running or covering 88% of routes, or lining up 88% of the time in the slot. So the one guy I really like from this game is Juju Smith-Schuster. It's not something outside of that I'm really enticed by, and I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, so one thing we do need to say is that Juju does have a pretty high price tag, even though he does have an appealing matchup. But the ownership does look pretty low for him this week as well. So I definitely like it. One thing I noticed in the fantasy points over opponent average metric, Philadelphia is currently 4th worst in terms of points against tight ends, which leads me to maybe a little bit more Eric Ebron than I might first expect. And especially if Deontay Johnson is still possibly banged up. I know he didn't practice Wednesday, nor did Juju Smith-Schuster, so some of that is maintenance. But that might be a place I'll go, and if I want to get really contrarian, and I might even do one Vance McDonald here or there. But it does look like Philadelphia is a little bit exploitable over the middle of the field in particular. They cleaned things up a little bit against San Francisco, but again, they were playing 2 backup quarterbacks. So we talk about contextualizing all the time on this podcast and this stream. That's another one where we have to contextualize. James Conner is priced a little bit too high for me, but I don't think he's in the worst situation at all. Philadelphia has been about average against the running back in terms of fantasy points over opponent average. Like you said, I'm just kind of lukewarm about these two teams in terms of this slate. Maybe the Steelers are a little bit closer to the 2018 offense than the public is realizing right now. That might be a good way to play this as a second or third most likely option that they smash. But that's certainly not the thing I'm predicting to be the most likely.
All right, let's keep going here. Baltimore, Cincinnati. This is the 6th game of 12, so we're about midway through here. Okay. Joe Burrow, and I would recommend when we use stats here, don't look at any one specific stat as Bible. Use them in conjunction with each other. But it was interesting to me looking at Pro Football Focus's expected points tool and seeing that Joe Burrow is, according to this tool, has scored way fewer fantasy points than expected. The plus minus on points per game is 6.1, minus 6.1, meaning he's averaging 20.1 fantasy points per game. His expected points per game is 26.1. Again, don't put too much weight into this, but it definitely does suggest that he's been a little bit unlucky in respect to what he's been able to do and what he should be able to do and what has actually happened. But now you've got a Baltimore matchup where they're 2 touchdown dogs. It's a tough spot. Now, granted, I didn't think that Dwayne Haskins would be able to come in last week and complete 32 passes on 45 attempts for 300 plus yards. He didn't throw for any touchdowns, but that was pretty shocking to me. Ultimately, what I'm saying is Joe Burrow, according to a number of metrics, has actually been better than his overall fantasy production would indicate.
Yeah, well said. And just a quick note about that Baltimore defense. In terms of PFF grades, they certainly graded very highly in the top 10 of all their main metrics last year, but they're really middle of the road in terms of PFF grades this year in terms of coverage and an overall defensive grade. So your eyes are saying the same thing that the metrics are.
Marlon Humphrey's been the one that's been particularly good, as expected.
Yeah, he's still in that top tier of cornerbacks in terms of coverage rating. And so, yeah, I'm seeing the exact same thing as Joe Burrow, and I'm not exactly sure how PFF's expected points tool works, but I have to imagine it has a lot to do with the amount of volume. They're letting him pass a tremendous amount, especially on early downs. When the game is close, they're really putting the ball in Burrow's hands. And then, again, I'm going to bring up that pace stat I brought up earlier, air yards per second. They're just completely running away from the league in that stat. So they're throwing it deep, they're throwing it early, and they're throwing it often. Plenty of volume, hence the expected points. Now, do I think that he regresses all the way back to his mean and he gets 6 points over his average against the Ravens? No, probably not. His projection against the Ravens on Awesemo.com is a little bit lower than his QB11 salary this week, but the ownership is really intriguing. He's down under 1%, and it doesn't really make sense relative to the amount of points we know he's likely to put up. You're basically saying, I'm betting that the Ravens are getting multiple turnovers on the Bengals this week, and I'm not sure we can say that. They've been above average in defensive expected points, and that means the game is likely going to be close for the Bengals. I think it's a hard way to see this game overall. So we know that the ownership is going to be a little bit higher for Joe Mixon. I like going Joe Burrow, and maybe T. Higgins is a stack instead of Tyler Boyd or A.J. Green. That might be a way I'm playing it.
Fair enough. Yeah, if Marlon Humphrey's seeing a lot of Tyler Boyd, and I think he will, shut him down last year, no surprise there. It's really tough, man, with A.J. Green, because it sure seems like things have but have already trended in the wrong direction.
Right.
It's so crazy to me, though. Like, deep balls, Pro Football Focus has 0 of 10 that were catchable. Expected fantasy points for him, this one's insane. Like, if you look at expected fantasy points for AJ Green, your head would explode. It's absurd. But you know, how much can we really look at this and use it to make decisions? At this point, it's really, really difficult. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. But if you're looking at Pro Football Focus, his expected points are 56 and his actual points are 26. What a massive, massive disparity there. But I definitely think that maybe that they just haven't adjusted to what we've seen from AJ Green yet, and that is a problem. So do I think it's worth maybe taking a couple shots if Tyler Boyd is seeing Marlon Humphrey treatment? Sure. But like I already said, I took the L on AJ Green after the first couple of weeks. It saddens me to say that, because I love this guy and I really wanted him to be good.
And this is anecdotal, Dave, but he's not 100%. I had this thought while I was watching him last week, and I was like, he's getting up the way Calvin Johnson used to get up in his last few years, where it was like after the play was over, you saw his body sort of shut down a little bit as he helped himself up. Anyway, I hope we see old AJ Green a time or two before his time is up, but it's hard to bet on.
It is. If he drops down to that 4K range, then I'm going to be singing a different song for sure. 4,800, I don't think is insane. If they're going to be playing from behind, I might be able to sprinkle in. If I ended up like 5-6% AJ Green, I'm not going to make any adjustments to get him out of my player pool. Put it that way.
Makes sense.
Not a spot I'm really interested in Joe Mixon either. Phenomenal week last week, but I probably stay away from him here. I just think this is going to be a very difficult spot for him to get anything going. But you're seeing Gio Bernard kind of phased out of this offense and Joe Mixon being featured as the pass-catching back. Joe Bernard did not see a single target last game. So maybe you could make an argument in that respect. He's 6,300. But I think there are a lot of good running backs this week, which is probably the reason I get less of Mixon than other running backs at a similar price point.
Hard agree. Not really much to add there. Yeah, exactly.
Any thoughts on the Baltimore Ravens?
Certainly something to keep an eye on. Jackson missed practice with a knee injury on Wednesday, probably just maintenance. Same with Marquise Brown. Again, this whole game changes if Robert Griffin has to start. We're not there yet. All the Ravens running backs in a game where they're heavy favorite are seeing really, really low ownership, under 1%. So the reason is because the volume is so split up and Jackson takes so much of the rush volume for himself. Gus Edwards has actually been the most efficient back in terms of expected points added per rush. At 4,000 on DraftKings this week in a game situation that probably favors running backs, you could do worse than him. But again, it's just a situation sort of like the Rams where they look like a good spot, but picking between three guys is just really, really tough. I'm still hoping for Marquise Brown. I hate to see that his salary is up at wide receiver 13 because his median projection, especially on Awesemo.com, does not mesh with that at all. But relative to how this probability of breaking the slate, his 0.5% ownership doesn't really represent that. So I wouldn't call you crazy for going there with a couple lineups either, in case that he's the one who finally gets all the touchdowns. He got tackled at the one annoyingly again last week.
Do you want to move on, or is there anything else to hit on from this one?
I think we got to mention the tight ends. Mark Andrews is still not getting a ton of volume, but if you're scoring on all your volume, I'm interested. So he's touchdown dependent at 6,200 and the tight end 3 this week. The Awesemo.com projections right in line with that. And the Ravens defense against the Bengals, it's not the worst way to play it. That's how I started talking about this game. If you assume that Burrow's turning the ball over multiple times, then the Ravens are a great play.
So Thursday night football, that means that we've got some pretty awesome giveaways happening. If you go to the pinned tweet at Awesemo_com, you'll see it right there. All you got to do is follow the instructions on the graphic. It's very simple. Predict who's going to have more yards, Nick Foles or Tom Brady. That's the first phase of it. Second one is one random winner selected among the correct guesses to get ready for this, a free year of Awesemo Plus NFL content. It's a monster prize to win just for answering a question and going and following us on Twitter and making your pick between Foles and between Tom Brady. If you haven't done so yet, too, follow Matt at Draftaholic on Twitter. Follow myself at Loughy_D, LOUGHY_D. Twitter's a disgusting place to be for everything outside of sports, but I would definitely recommend having an account for sports. Follow the people you like, respect, and they can give you good information. And it definitely helps throughout the week. There's no question.
One more thing. That, Dave? Yeah, sure. If you like to make lists, Twitter is awesome for making lists. You don't have to publicize who's on the list at all. And then you can use a website like TweetDeck, and it basically comes in as a live ticker feed. That's how I get all my news. It's really great for sports.
It certainly is. I have one for basketball, baseball, and football, and other stuff. One more thing, because we're halfway through it here. I did want to tell you guys that the Showdowns content that we have, the ownership projections, the player projections, the rankings, the top players, all of that stuff, and all of the articles, the lineup builder, you name it, all of that stuff is available for football for only $3.95 a week. We already had the Express Pass under $4, and it had a bunch of stuff included in it. But now we've added everything, including the Showdown slates. So everything that we have for Showdown slates, there's 3 of them a week, sometimes more, depending on what we're getting here with COVID, is all included with that $3.95 a week package. It's the Awesemo Express NFL package. So check that out. It's a huge bang for your buck. It's a great deal. If you're someone though that wants to get into everything from football to baseball to basketball to MMA, NASCAR, League of Legends, esports, PGA, all of it, right? Like everything they've got on DraftKings and Fanduel. We've got phenomenal premium content for that, especially Awesemo's Alex Baker, #1 ranked DFS player in the world, his tools, his ownership that he uses, the projections that he uses himself, and the top stack tool that's so valuable for so many sports. So if you haven't been there, go to awesemo.com/join. Check it out. We've got something for any budget. Like I said, there's an Express Pass. There's the All Access Weekly Pass. The All Access Monthly, I think, is the best one out there. But in terms of bang for your buck and getting the best value on it, really it's the annual, but I know a lot of people aren't in a position to shell out for that right now. But that really is your best deal. Everything included, all from the number 1 ranked DFS player in the world. These are legitimately the tools that he uses, not just sticking a name on them and saying, hey, look, Alex Baker made these tools. That's not how we do things at Awesemo. And you can see from going to the Awesemo Hall of Fame that people have had a lot of success using these tools and become better players. One last thing, go to the Slack chat, the premium Slack chat when you sign up, say what's up, become part of the community. It's a good one here. People talking DFS, sports, and sports betting around the clock in the Awesemo Slack chat. You got the lineup builder too, and the Fantasy Cruncher add-on, which is so huge for you guys wanting to do MME and play multiple lineups each week. Awesemo.com/join. We'll see you over there. All right, Matt, Jacksonville and Houston. James Robinson, man, this guy's putting on a show. He's been heavily involved in his offense. You look at someone like Chris Thompson, and even he is being phased out, still getting a little bit of third down work, but he didn't touch the ball a single time or even have a single opportunity last time out. James Robinson, on the other hand, playing from behind against Cincinnati, saw 17 carries. He's getting all of the running back carries and 4 targets. He's now been targeted 14 times over his last 3 games. So he essentially is the exclusive member of this backfield, getting almost all of the work. Is he worth paying for this week, though, against a just bad Houston team, bad Houston defense that just fired their head coach, fired the GM, on to Romeo Crennel? It's a bad situation in Houston.
Yeah, and they don't have first or second round pick this year either, because Bill O'Brien was able to ship those out on his way out too. So, James Robinson, what can you say about him? Personally, players like him are the reason I watch football. In my matchups column that comes out later today, I talked about him being on the trajectory, and this is high praise, but if he stays healthy and he stays efficient, he's on that Austin Eckler, Arian Foster, undrafted rookie to every down starter every single year long into his career. So it's just awesome to see a player who didn't even play in the top level of college football absolutely tearing things up. If you look in the elusiveness ratings for PFF, in terms of how many touches he's had versus avoided targets, he grades out incredibly well in the same sphere as players like Eckler, like Mike Davis, who we're talking about. He's really just had a phenomenal season, and his usage is top 10 in the league. So now the question, as you said, is do we pay for him as the 6th highest running back on the slate when they're not favored in this game? And the only reason you would is because you think he's going to get plenty of targets, even if they're from behind, or they have a chance to win this game in a high game total. So I don't think he's the worst bet. I think 11% ownership, as Awesemo.com projects, is probably fair. That's the 10th running back on the slate. But in terms of usage and his ability to score multiple touchdowns and get that 100 yards bonus, I really think the probability is pretty high. And there's absolutely no guarantee that the Texans play up to their implied total in this game. The Jaguars absolutely could steal this from them, and if they are in fact ahead, then Robinson could be a smash play. What
are you doing with DJ Shark? Finally, I wouldn't even use the word breakout game. We saw several of them last season, but maybe a type of game that calmed some people's nerves following the first 2 weeks of the year where he was wildly disappointing.
Yeah, and he's been hurt, so coming back, and what can we say? We want touchdowns from the wide receiver position. He scored 2 of them. That means he played a great game, and you were happy that you played him in DFS. Do I like his projection related to his wide receiver 9 salary? I really don't. And we're going to see increased ownership. I'm seeing 6.6% projection right now. That's the 20th wide receiver on the board. He's still just 44th in true weighted opportunity share, and that contextualizes it based on his missed time. So I think it's a little bit of a high price. He's not my favorite play. If he keeps scoring touchdowns, you're going to love him anyway. So Minshew's sort of regressed a little bit towards the middle of the pack in terms of overall efficiency, but an average an average quarterback throwing to an above average receiver in a high total game is certainly not a bad play fundamentally.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not enamored with him though. I think you're probably talking about a price point that should be maybe $500 lower, but
I'd like it more if Shenault didn't play, but it looks like Shenault was limited, which probably means he's going to make it to game time this Sunday.
You see some Bradley Roby too, right? Pro Football Focus says this is a shadow matchup for Shark. I can't say I'm terribly concerned about that, but I do think there are a few better options, and many of them we've already discussed. On the Houston side of the ball, they're still sizable favorites, 6.5 points. Now, this game did push below that 7-point number, which is, as a key number, it's worth pointing out that we were at 7, we're down to 6.5, which takes a little bit to move that. 54-point total here. Your thoughts on David Johnson and the pass catchers, and of course Deshaun Watson in a pretty much dysfunctional offense and dysfunctional team that maybe they can turn things around at least for a week.
Well, I certainly think a lot of DFS players are going to play this game like Joe Mixon just scored 40 points against the Jaguars. I'm going to play the Houston running back against the Jaguars. And that's why you're seeing ownership for David Johnson above 25%. That's running back 5 on the slate, and the price is right. I'm sort of understanding why people are going there. He's the 23rd highest salary running back. The projection is certainly higher for him than that salary this weekend, but I'm not sure I'm ready to be at 25% ownership on David Johnson the way he's looked this year. If we look at fantasy points over opponent average, the Jaguars do grade out as the 3rd best team for running backs. So most advantageous team for running backs. They're giving up 9.9 points over opponent average to running backs. That spells good things for David Johnson. But again, Duke Johnson did mix back into the fold again. He's getting healthier, so we're probably going to see more looks for him. And again, like, we're still betting on this dysfunctional team who hasn't won a game to have some sort of miraculous turnaround because their coach left. I was actually surprised to see them as such heavy favorites against the Jaguars. I know they haven't looked good, but they're not incompetent as a team.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When you move through that seven number, it says a lot. And they did. So there's a decent amount of backing on the Jaguars, and I can't say I'm shocked by it. I don't have a ton of faith. One of the problems is the ability to throw the ball to DeAndre Hopkins when a play breaks down is the quarterback's best friend. There isn't really that option there. Like Brandon Cooks, sure, maybe he'll create some separation. He hasn't done a great job of that, but he's not the type of guy that when things go to shit, you're looking for. Will Fuller, sure, speed guy, great receiver. DeAndre Hopkins is the type of receiver who can do anything at any period of time, anywhere on the field, no matter how badly a play breaks down. And you don't have that. And it's clearly showing. So I have some concerns there. Ultimately, it's a slate with a lot of really good options, with a lot of high scoring games. And, you know, I'm not opposed to looking elsewhere. So when it comes to David Johnson, could he have a strong game? Sure. But so could Duke Johnson. We don't know if Romeo Crennel is loyal to Bill O'Brien's idea that David Johnson is worth DeAndre Hopkins. But 25.5% ownership on David Johnson at 5,200. Man, that is a scary, scary ownership rate. If he was down there much lower, I'd be willing to take the plunge. But Matt, that's a lot of ownership on someone that has ultimately, and you pretty much just said this, shown us virtually nothing.
Yeah, if you think this game is hitting the total and that the Texans are hitting their implied total, then you should be all over Deshaun Watson and his weapons. You know, we're seeing him, you know, it's not like he has low ownership, but he's at 10.4% ownership. But the bet you're making really is that Deshaun Watson is essentially a superstar in the league, and sort of like LeBron James on his NBA teams, he's the coach now. He's taking over the play calling. He's going to do whatever it takes to turn the Houston season around. I don't think that's the most likely thing. Could it happen? Yeah, sure. But if you think that is the most likely, then be all over Deshaun Watson this week.
I might even sprinkle in some Duke Johnson at this point. Pretty much minimum salary on DraftKings. Who knows? I do know this much. The Texans having a 30-plus point implied total seems kind of egregious based on what we've seen in the past, but who am I to say? Kansas City, Las Vegas, Patrick Mahomes leading the charge for the Chiefs here. Big-time favorites, as expected and as they should be. You're talking about a 13-point spread, 56-point total. A pretty fascinating game, though, all the way from Clyde Edwards-Helaire to Mahomes to Kelsey to Tyreek Hill, who's sub $7,000 on DraftKings. Las Vegas does not have the personnel defensively, nor does anyone, to slow down this Vegas or this Kansas City team. And I think here's what I think could be the biggest issue, Matt. Bill Belichick is a genius, whether you love the guy or not. The game planning of that coaching staff to do everything they could to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands was working up until the interception started flowing. This was actually a one-score game. And the time of possession game was actually somewhat fruitful. I don't see any way that Las Vegas can do that. I get it. Josh Jacobs is a talented back, and maybe he can make that work. But I don't know if they have the coaching staff or the personnel to do what the Patriots did to try and limit and keep the ball out of the Chiefs' hands. And if they don't, this could get ugly very quickly.
Yeah, and no one can. No one is Bill Belichick on defense.
Exactly.
No one is able to scheme like he can for a specific player. I'm sorry, I don't have the stats in front of me, but I just know it to be true. It is. I can tell you that Patrick Mahomes is a different quarterback against the Patriots in terms of expected points added than he is against literally every other team. So am I concerned about the Las Vegas Raiders in the fact that they don't give up a huge amount of points to the wide receiver position or the quarterback position in terms of fantasy points over opponent average? Absolutely not. I think that this is an obvious, what we might call a get right spot for Mahomes and the offense. And I think if you were just betting on fireworks, that wouldn't be the worst bet at all. That leads you to a couple of scenarios that you could play. Obviously, you're still considering Patrick Mahomes, even with his quarterback 2 salary and his 13% ownership. You're also considering players like Tyreek Hill, but also Sammy Watkins, who actually has seen more targets than Hill on multiple games this year. So we usually think of Watkins as this boom bust play because that's what he's been on the Chiefs his entire career there. But he's actually seeing much more usage this year. And his Awesemo.com projection actually reflects that. He's in the low 30s among wide receivers in projection, but he's still wide receiver 50 in price. If I'm getting 7 targets from Patrick Mahomes for wide receiver 50 salary and 10% ownership, I'm all over that. So I think I kind of like that play. And of course, it's going to be really hard to get away from Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I almost understand this one more than I understand David Johnson's 25+% ownership. It still feels like the giant CEH game is coming. We see the usage is sky high. We know he's in the top 8 in overall opportunity share. And the Vegas Raiders are right next to Jacksonville in terms of that fantasy points over opponent average stat that I keep bringing up this week. 9.5 points over opponent average. Needless to say, if Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets 9 points more than his average, you're going to be very, very happy this week, even at running back 5 salary.
Additionally, when it comes to Sammy Watkins, he's tied for the team lead in red zone targets with Travis Kelce. Not only that, though, he leads the team with more he has 2 targets inside the 5-yard line as well, which leads the team 4 inside the 10. So these aren't just like at the 19, at the 17-yard line. Once Patrick Mahomes gets inside the 10, once it's a goal-to-go situation, you've actually had Sammy Watkins really involved in spots like this, more so than Tyreek Hill and just as much as Travis Kelce. That makes him a little bit more interesting, just knowing that maybe when you look at what quality of targets he's receiving, generally speaking, when you're not in the red zone and you're in between the 20s, Sammy Watkins certainly isn't getting Tyreek Hill type of opportunities, but that doesn't matter as much. His 6.8 ADOT doesn't matter as much if they get in the red zone and he has a legitimate touchdown equity, which to me is also interesting.
I will say one thing about Tyreek Hill, though. He never looks good in those red zone stats because he scores from outside the red zone.
Of course.
You can't get in the red zone if you're scoring from 30 yards away.
Of course, but that's kind of the point. You don't need those same type of looks if you're Tyreek Hill. If you're Sammy Watkins, you need that because you're not getting those opportunities to score from outside of the red zone. What are your thoughts on the Raiders starting with Josh Jacobs?
Well, he's certainly getting the usage. I think he's the third highest in overall touches this year. And from that perspective, betting on the running back 12 in terms of salary with that kind of usage is a pretty good bet. But I'm seeing that his ownership projection is even higher than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And we know that has to do somewhat with price. He's 6,300 on DraftKings this week, which means that you're looking for about a 19-point score for that 3x value that some people really like to look for. What we're really hoping for is he gets a lot of receptions in comeback mode, or he's the one plunging into the end zone as the Raiders supposedly come back or are just in garbage time. Again, this is anecdotal, but Derek Carr, he is the king in the way that almost Jay Cutler used to be, down 2.5 scores, just playing his heart out with 4 minutes left in the fourth and getting the Raiders to within a score and a half. And if you think that Josh Jacobs is the one to benefit from situations like that, then I think you're probably in line with his 27% ownership. If not, I think he's probably a fade this week, even at a decent price.
Darren Waller. Target share has been through the roof. Can't ignore that. It's 29% on the season, 24% of his team's air yards. I guess the biggest concern here is, well, how often are we going to see Darren Waller used in the red zone? And is it true? Like, are we going to start seeing some positive regression and he's going to start scoring some touchdowns? Or is this something that we should continue to see? I'm of the belief that we will begin to see some opportunities inside the red zone to score. He leads the team by a mile with 7 red zone targets, 3 of which have come inside the 10-yard line. Will it be this game? I don't know. But when you get peppered with targets like Darren Waller does, 2 games with 12-plus targets already, the only one where he really struggled was against New England, where, as you pointed out, Bill Belichick does his best to scheme the best players, specifically the best pass catchers, out of the offense, and he did that successfully. Aside from that, he's just been peppered with targets, with tons of opportunity. Do we get the same Darren Waller this week against the Kansas City Chiefs?
Well, I'm certainly of the belief that Ruggs and or Edwards being on the field actually helps a player like Waller spread out a defense. I don't have stats in front of me about it, but we talk about, especially in the NBA, something like gravity. A player like Henry Ruggs is absolutely going to move the defensive attention more than a player like Zay Jones or Nelson Aguilar at this point. That's just my belief. So we're really looking at Darren Waller as a value with volume related to salary. He's the 4th highest tight end in terms of salary this week, but the usage, as you said, is by far tight end 1 in the league. What I was surprised, again, to see is the ownership really, really high, just people trying to attack this game, it looks like, in terms of its high total. 27% ownership and the tight end 1 is a tough pill to swallow. Now, in situations where I don't care about ownership, maybe like a cash game, Waller seems like a pretty fine play, but it's not like Kansas City is this smash opportunity for tight ends or wide receivers in general. You know, they're about league average in terms of fantasy points over opponent average and in expected points. So what people are really saying is, I want to look at this game script as a game with tons of touchdowns or tons of passing, and Darren Waller is going to get a majority of that. Not the worst bet, but not necessarily tight end 1, 27% ownership type of bet.
Anything else from this game?
I guess you got to look at Zay Jones or Nelson Aguilar. They ran Nelson Aguilar a ton last week with Edwards and Ruggs missing. It's still too early in the week to find out if they're going to play. Edwards is less likely than Ruggs. I'm not looking at Jalen Richard, so we really don't have to mention there. Derek Carr, again, in that comeback, Jay Cutler-esque garbage time mode. Not the worst bet in terms of how many touchdowns through the air that we might see. I think 3 passing touchdowns is certainly not out of the question.
You know, you guys can check out all of this stuff, all of these shows, all of these live streams on the podcast network. Any platform that has podcasts, any podcast platform, we're on it. So whether it's iTunes, Spotify, whatever the other ones are, Stitcher and all that good stuff, we're out there. You could check them out. If you don't feel like pulling up YouTube, maybe you're driving, it's easier just to listen to the podcast, do that. And while you're at it, subscribe and rate the show if you like it as well, or sorry, the channel. And also check out Odds Shopper. I won't go on a tangent about it, but I'll just say it's free. You guys that have been watching for a while already know that I love it. I use it every single week to pull up stats, to pull up props, to use the bet tracker, the watch list. And we've got really amazing stuff coming within the next, I want to say, week or two. It's going to blow your mind. It's awesome. For DFS, for sports betting, it's going to change everything, and it's entirely free. So oddshopper.awesemo.com. You're going to love it. Plus, all of the massive referral or all of the massive deposit bonuses that these books are giving out, basically free money on $500 free bets, $1,000 deposit bonuses, insane stuff. If your state it's legal to play, there's no better place, there's no better time to do it now. So go to OddsShopper, check all of that out, and certainly check out some of those books before you sign up. Miami, San Francisco. Devontae Parker with a big game last week. I was very happy to see that. Didn't find the end zone, but showing flashes of what we saw last season spill over into the 2020 year. Miami Dolphins hung around for a while, but the problem here is they just can't protect Ryan Fitzpatrick, Matt. If you look at the time that he's holding on to the ball, it's like the second lowest in the league in terms of how long he's in the pocket, how long it takes before he leaves the pocket, how long the ball is in his hands before he throws it, all of that, way towards the bottom of the league, because if he doesn't, he's done. He's going to get crushed, or he's going to get picked, or he's going to fumble. That's, I think, one of the reasons that Tua's not in there, because he'll be dead. And I think you have to credit Ryan Fitzpatrick, honestly, for doing a very good job of getting rid of the ball early and not destroying this team in the process. Most quarterbacks, quite frankly, wouldn't be able to handle the type of pressure that he's seen this year. But it definitely affects the rest of this team and makes them a little bit less appealing going up against this San Francisco defense.
Yeah, I think you said that very well. And one thing I was also noticing with Fitzpatrick, and this is probably related to his time he has to throw, he's not throwing the ball deep. I still have this imagery of him in Tampa Bay going deep over and over to Deshaun Jackson, and it's really not happening. His deep balls per game is in the bottom third, actually the bottom 5 of starting quarterbacks right now. So that does lean me to these shorter area targets that he's forced to throw, especially if the pocket is collapsing around him. So I've been impressed with Myles Gaskin in terms of his efficiency on the amount of touches he's been getting. He's above the historical trend line in terms of avoided touches, in terms of his avoided tackles, in terms of his touches. So at a running back 29 price tag, even in this negative matchup, he is not the worst play, in my opinion. He's only coming in at 4.8% ownership projection right now. I actually think I like him more than Fitzpatrick and these passing options. Even though San Francisco continues to be beat up in the secondary, I saw Sherman is not planning to practice this week. That means he's still out. I don't think I'm going back to the well in terms of Fitzpatrick and his good game against Seattle. Seattle's defense, they're not on the slate this week, but they're a sieve to quarterbacks and wide receivers. That's really what we were targeting last week. Not the same case, even with an injured San Francisco defense.
I'm with you. By the way, unimportant for this week, but Ryan Fitzpatrick, 72.7% completion rate under pressure this season. It's the highest in the league. So credit the man. I just don't really like this team this week, whether it be Gaskin or the passing game. Do you have interest in San Francisco, namely someone like Jerick McKinnon?
I do. Mostert, we have to say he did return to practice this week. I do think that at this point, Mostert is the most talented back on the roster when healthy. But assuming Mostert's not quite ready yet, I think McKinnon is a great play at his running back 17 salary. The matchup isn't perfect, but again, it's sort of the fundamentals of we're playing the Dolphins at home. The 49ers are a favorite, and we want to take the running back who's likely to get touches, and we know will be scheme touches in the Kyle Shanahan backfield passing game, whatever you want to call it. The misdirections, the play action, he's still the best in the league, in my opinion, on getting people wide open in space. And Jerick McKinnon is the exact type of player that he loves to exploit defenses with. At 0.4% ownership, in terms of the probability of him breaking the slate, that's probably about right. I'd probably put it at 1 or 2. So that means I might be overweight on him comparatively. Jeff Wilson, if Mostert doesn't play, could get those red zone touches. The one thing we should mention, though, is that the wide receiver core is getting healthier, which, as we saw, it almost made things better for George Kittle to have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel is now available for them, it's going to make George Kittle, who in my opinion is up there with the best skill players in the league.
He's the best tight end in the league, Matt. Just say it. Say it. Don't be afraid. Just say it.
If I'm starting a team right now, I want Kittle over Kelsey. And that's no disrespect to him.
Doesn't that feel good?
It felt nice. All right. It really is one of those things where you're going to get huge ownership because of that 15 target, 15 catch game on Kittle. And I'm still like, 14% ownership. Yeah, maybe I'll go above. That sounds good to me. I don't blame you, though, if you want to go on these wide receivers. Boy, Brandon Ayuk looked really awesome on that touchdown.
Oh, man.
That volume isn't there for them. But again, you are fine betting on Kyle Shanahan schemes his weapons open. They don't need the same amount of touches to be explosive compared to other teams.
So, George Kittle's ownership compared to some of these other tight ends is what's going to make a huge difference. Now, as you know, ownership will change sometimes dramatically throughout the week, so you have to pay very close attention to that. But right now, he's pulling about half the ownership of Darren Waller, 14% to Travis Kelce's 22%, to Evan Ingram's 20%. Kittle's not that much more expensive than these other guys. Like, he's $200 more than Kelce, $700 more than Waller, and he's coming off of a game where he caught 15 of 15 passes. Now, am I saying he's going to see another 15 attempts? Not necessarily, but I really like him this week. He's my favorite player from this game for sure. McKinnon, if Mostert is out, is great as well. But no question, George Kittle, it's really hard not to like him.
And regardless of quarterback, too. If Garoppolo's back, even better.
Beathard didn't look that bad either.
No, in my opinion, he looked a little bit better. If you look at in terms of expected points added per play, Beathard was a little bit better on that smaller sample. They got a great quarterback stable in San Francisco. It's really all you got to say.
New England and Denver. Cam Newton. I don't know if he's going to play. Is he confirmed out?
I think we should assume he's out, and that the Patriots are just being the Patriots and not saying so directly yet.
Okay. I don't know the answer to that.
I think Rappaport had a tweet right when he tested positive that Saturday that said, based on the way that the protocols work, it would be very unlikely that he's able to play Sunday. Week 5.
So we'll operate under the assumption that he's out. This should come as no surprise to anybody, but we don't have a line. We don't have a total in this game. Some spots I'm seeing Patriots minus 11, but I'm not necessarily seeing it on all of these books. What are your thoughts on a game that, all in all, really just seems kind of disgusting? I'm not saying we can't pick and choose some spots here, but I'm not enamored with either side of this game at all. And maybe you're a Damian Harris guy. I'll probably be looking elsewhere.
I mean, I think it's very easy to say, let's not get caught in the running back on the Patriots trap, where someone who goes off the week before is likely to even get touches the next week. That said, I think Damian Harris is the best running back on the team. And I know that they are more run-oriented than they have ever been in New England. And if they're heavy favorites against either Drew Lock or Brett Rippon, then the running back position is certainly not a bad place to go. Could you get another 5-touchdown game from Rex Burkhead at 0.1% ownership? Yeah, you could. Could James White just have 12 catches and that's the way Belichick decides to win this game and slow down the clock by the short area targets? I mean, yeah, honestly, that could happen too. So it's really hard to be overweight and bet on anyone from this Patriots team, especially with the quarterback position up in the air. Certainly difficult to go to the wide receiver position. Julian Edelman had a really rough game on Monday night, working with two backups there.
Well, hold on. No. By the way, some great points on Harris, and I want to touch on that in a second. And I don't mean to cut you off here, but the backups, yes. The one interception was entirely on Julian Edelman.
Yes.
Like was that one of the most uncharacteristic plays you've ever seen from him, though? He never does that.
It was bizarre. And that drop that he had where he spun around and dove in the way we've seen him do it 1,000 times, and then the ball just pops out. It was jarring.
He had one of the greatest catches you'll ever see in the Super Bowl in that comeback against the Atlanta Falcons. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes.
He's made a lot of those. Last week, let's hope it was an outlier. I'm going to assume it was, but he didn't help those backup quarterbacks. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, I think you added a lot there. He looked bad and didn't get the usage we are used to seeing for Julian Edelman. So if we're saying his efficiency may not be there, his accuracy and targets won't be there, and his volume isn't there from what we're used to, then he's probably a bad play at wide receiver 21 on the slate. That said, under 5% ownership, and if we think it goes and reverts a little bit back towards a mean, then Julian Edelman is a fine play. I saw that the Awesemo.com projections are pretty much in line with the salary, but they're actually a little bit bullish on him in the 15 to 20 range for Edelman. I'm really happy that N'Keal Harry is getting looks, particularly in the red zone. I mean, just to see him make that diving play in the end zone, you got to think from a Patriots standpoint, that's exactly what they envisioned when they got him in the first round last year. And then Jameer Byrd is a solid third option, but at 10% ownership, and that's wide receiver 13 in terms of the ranking of ownership, that's a little high for me. So I know the price is right at a min price at $3,000 on DraftKings, but I'm not sure I like it as much as that 10% ownership.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing with Harris that one thing is we know that he's not going to have involvement in the passing game. I think we can agree on that. I was a little bit surprised to see last week the two opportunities inside the 10 both went to Rex Burkhead. And the only opportunity inside the 5 went to Rex Burkhead. Is that a sign of things to come? Matt, I'm not necessarily saying it is. Way too small of a sample size. But Rex Burkhead inside of the 10 was the only running back used when given the chance. But like I said, things can change, and maybe Damian Harris will be that guy.
My instinct was that was a pass protection thing with them running out those two backups. They were most concerned about being a little bit more flexible, and they know Burkhead can get open in the passing game or block if needed.
It's possible. But is that the same case this week then?
Yeah, I think that's we want our running backs that we're playing in DFS to get the goal line carries. We're certainly going to be tilting if we're playing Harris and Burkhead's in there. So I think if you're playing one, you might want to hedge with the other or a James White roster. But if you want to stay away, I completely understand as well.
Are you at all interested in Denver? You can just say no if there's nothing there.
Man, I want to be in on Melvin Gordon. He's having a really efficient season, but this certainly isn't the matchup to bet on him. So if you think that in comeback mode, regardless of quarterback, that Melvin Gordon just gets some dump-off passes, he can be efficient. At less than 1% ownership, you're certainly going to get some differentiation with him just being in your lineup. And no, he's not the worst bet as a running back 10 in terms of salary, but it looks like a really bad game script. Phillip Lindsay looks like he's going to play this week. And it's not like he's untalented. He could steal real touches, real valuable touches from Gordon. He's been a Pro Bowler in the league. It's really hard to bet on any of these wide receivers. I'm looking at the Awesemo projections, and they're not really bullish on anyone. Maybe Deshaun Hamilton at his min price salary, or Noah Fant, who's down at 5,400, are okay. This is probably a stay away spot.
Okay. Talking about a game where we will not be staying away from, whether you want to or not. Dallas and the New York Giants. Well, here we go, man. This is why I wanted to save a little bit of time and rip through some of those other games more quickly, because this is one that will take a few minutes. The Dallas Cowboys have a 32-point implied total. New York Giants 22.25, 54-point total in the game, and the Cowboys are laying 9.5 points at home, which is pretty incredible given how badly their defense has played. They're averaging over 500 yards of offense every game, but they're also coughing up 400 plus yards defensively. And much of that offense is coming late in the game when it's significantly out of reach. The New York Giants, though, road team, getting 9.5 points. I don't know. I can't help but think, and you know, people will not like this. If you're in chat and you don't want to hear me talk about Daniel Jones, just mute this and come back in the next game. That's fine. I will be getting to some Daniel Jones this week. And until Dallas proves me wrong, I will have interest there. And one of the reasons for that is because I think Evan Ingram is a very talented tight end. And I think guys like, in the passing game, there are some options in Slayton and Tate that are they good? No, but they're super cheap, and you could do a lot worse than that. And the same thing I pointed out yesterday with Matt Gajewski and with Kyle Dvorak, and I'll end it here. Daniel Jones has faced the Rams, he's faced the Niners, he's faced the Bears, and he's faced the Steelers. It's just one of the toughest draws you're going to get as a starting quarterback. He's been miserable. He ranks dead last in pretty much every relevant metric. I get all of that, but he's also dirt cheap. His team has a much higher total than they normally do. And, I'll probably end up on some Daniel Jones running it back with Ezekiel Elliott or an Amari Cooper. So that's where I'm at, Matt. I'm going to have a lot of this game whether I want to or not.
Yeah, I'm probably going to need a shower after clicking go on Daniel Jones. But, yeah, I'm doing it too. The Dallas defense to wide receivers and tight ends, they're both way, way, way above average in terms of wide receiver fantasy points over opponent average. It's 9 points a game higher than opponent's average for Dallas. That's 5th worst in the league. So I think your Daniel Jones call is right on the money. And even if you just assume the game plays out similarly to the Vegas totals say it will, if Dallas is going to have this high of a total, then the Giants are going to be in comeback mode in the second half. Daniel Jones, who runs the ball more than people think, is going to be trying to sling it to Darius Slayton and to Golden Tate. They still have no Sterling Shepard. One thing I did want to point out, Darius Slayton has really, really high ownership. I'm seeing a 20% ownership projection for him. That's really based on price. He's 4,800, and in this plus in terms of wide receiver cornerback matchup, I do understand why it's so high. But I think that might get you over to a player like Ingram, who's down at not low ownership, but tight end 3, lower than Waller and lower than Kittle, as we mentioned earlier. Or even these secondary options. Maybe you think Dion Lewis gets a bunch of receptions in comeback mode, or even Golden Tate, again, 11.5% ownership. But I think you're exactly right. This is the type of game flow that we really haven't seen from the Giants, where they're down, but they have a defense that's exploitable. And one thing you really have to say about the Cowboys defense is it's really, really bad when a team is up and you know they're running and you can't stop the run.
307 rushing yards allowed just last week.
I mean, talk about just like taking it to another team. That is the worst thing you can see as a defense, is you know what's coming and you can't stop it anyway. And that's really where the Cowboys are at. They're still so beat up at the linebacker core, and they're not having any luck in the secondary as well. No, this is not a good matchup for the Giants. They still are heavy underdogs here. But from a fantasy production standpoint, this looks a lot better than their implied total.
I agree. And you're getting them all at discounts. I think there will be some ownership here, but if you can't score points against Dallas with just the complete sheer ineptitude that we've seen defensively, you're never.
That's actually kind of a nice point. Like, if we can't bet on the Giants in a situation like this, even in a close or a game that they're losing, we really can't bet on the Giants. We just can't bet on their players. Great. We know more now.
It's kind of simple, right? You don't even have to dig that deep into it. They faced some really, really difficult teams, and I'm willing to roll the dice and say they're bad, but they're not as bad as they looked against those teams, and maybe they should be a little bit more expensive against the Cowboys. Simple as that. What about Devontae Freeman? We saw last week where I mentioned this yesterday. I'll say it one more time for those of you that missed it. Sal Vetri on Tuesday's show with Ben Ross and myself, our first look show, made a really good point. We might not ever really find out if Devontae Freeman is washed or not because of this offensive line. But I know Cleveland's run blocking has been very good. They had guys like Dearness Johnson racking up almost 100 yards. Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb got hurt, but before that he was crushing. They were just running all over them. Odell Beckham had like a 50-yard touchdown scamper on the ground. What?
That was awesome.
It was so awesome cool. Yeah. So I was happy to see him have a big game. I like Odell. I know a lot of people don't. I like Odell Beckham. But anyway, Devontae Freeman, the numbers aren't all that encouraging when you look at what he did last week. But he did see 15 opportunities He did cross the 10 fantasy point threshold, and his snap count essentially doubled from what we saw the week before. Does Devontae Freeman warrant some consideration this week at a very cheap price point?
Yeah, I'm not saying I like him as much as the receiving options. I think the way that I'm playing this game most likely is I'm taking Giants pass catchers in a contrarian stack, or I'm running it back with Giants pass catchers because I'm playing Cowboys. But with Devontae Freeman's running back 32 salary, I certainly understand how you can project him higher than that running back 32 ranking that his salary implies. His ownership is going to be there. It looks like it's a top 12 running back ownership, but that's still just 4.7%. It's not the worst bet in the world, but if you look at fantasy points over opponent average, I know I sound like a broken record, but it is a predictable stat that we can use week to week that finally has enough data. Dallas is league average. They're not great, but they're not bad either. So I see it as a mediocre matchup where the salary is right. I'm fine having about 5 to 10% Devonta Freeman.
How about the Dallas Cowboys? I've got some pretty wild stats for you, Matt. I was laying in bed last night just looking up some numbers for Thursday night football because I play hockey, and I didn't get home from my game till like 11:15. Where do you live? Are you on the East Coast?
Yeah, I'm in the New York area.
So you know what Wawa is then, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the Wawa Gobbler is back. And I tear that shit up every time this year, right? You're talking the stuffing, the turkey, the cranberry sauce on a wonderful, fresh roll. It's amazing. So I'm driving home from hockey. I'm in the Jeep. I'm trying to eat this without spilling it all over myself. Story's pointless. Point is, I got home very late. And I had to jump in the shower. I'm like, I'll probably sleep a little bit later. So let me start doing a little research now so I can hit the snooze button a few times. And I come across, as I'm looking at routes run data, something fascinating. So Michael Gallup leads the league in routes run with 193, and he's been targeted on 10% of those routes. Amari Cooper is second in routes run with 191. He's been targeted on 27% of them. The disparity is massive, but Michael Gallup is out there running routes the same amount as Amari Cooper, way more than CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb's getting more looks than Gallup. So with that in mind, what is going on with Gallup? Why is he out there running the same routes, getting the same overall, this sounds weird, chances of opportunity, right? Like it's there, but not getting any of the actual looks from Dak Prescott.
So I think the easiest answer, and I'll use a team from recent history as a corollary, is this is like the Los Angeles Rams when they had Brandon Cooks with a bad defense. So obviously the defense is very different than that Rams team. But the truth is that CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper are good. They're getting open and they're getting targets. And it really has nothing to do necessarily with Michael Gallup per se. And, it's a solid variance bet. We've already seen one giant Michael Gallup blow up at pretty low ownership. But again, I've said this already in this stream today, that this, looking at the ownership projections, it just talks about the general intelligence of the field we're playing against here. Michael Gallup is 12% owned. That's his projection, at least. That's the 9th highest wide receiver on the slate. Now, a lot has to do with his 5,400 salary. That's 24th among wide receivers. But players in DFS understand that the upside is way, way higher for Gallup than the production. That's not saying anything against the massive talent of Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. They're both tremendously good, but nothing has been taken away from Gallup. Does that mean that the volume overall, or in terms of target share, might be different than we saw in previous years? Yes. But could the overall production be the exact same by the end of the season? Also, absolutely yes. He's someone I definitely like, even at that 12% ownership. That 5,400 is just really, really appealing in this matchup.
We're on the same page. And I'll add to that, 396 air yards is second on the team, only to Amari Cooper. Average depth of target is 17.2 for Michael Gallup. What do I mean by that? Well, essentially, at least some of the chances he is getting when he's getting them are going to come deep downfield. and give him the chance to blow up like he did against Seattle. Unlike a spot where you say, oh, well, Adam Humphries only getting targeted this much, or Cole Beasley's only getting targeted this much per game. 5 targets for them is likely going to result in 3 for 36. Whereas with Gallup, even if he does only see 5 or 6 targets, there's definitely the shot of him going with 2 deep touchdowns, and I'm willing to run that risk at a discounted price point as well.
Exactly.
Ezekiel Elliott has been really the enigma of the National Football League this year. What do I mean by that? Well, just take a look at pretty much anything regarding red zone stats. Look at expected production over actual production. His expected touchdowns are 5.5. 5.5 expected touchdowns this season. There's just so many different ways to look at Zeke and know that things could change in a huge way. He has 12 carries inside the 5-yard line. That's 4 more than the next closest player this season. 70.8% of team red zone looks. Like, there's just so much there that hasn't materialized yet. That game is coming. And the fact that he is so involved as a pass catcher really just exemplifies how high his floor and his ceiling are at this point, or at this stage of the game.
Yeah, and you said it best. We're just going back to the well, hoping that happens at this point. All the underlying metrics are right there. Fundamentally, he's constantly been in situations where we would bet on the running back to produce. Yes, it's been incredibly annoying that at high price tags, he hasn't produced, but even at the sky-high ownership, he's seeing over 31% in projected ownership. I get it. I just completely get it in this plus matchup. One thing I will say is that their pace of play has slowed a little bit in Dallas. They're still passing a ton on early downs. I look at a stat called true early down pass rate, and that's in neutral situations. I filter it. And really, we're looking at some of the most pass-happy teams that Dallas is up with. The Chiefs, the Bills, the Seahawks in that metric. So we're really hoping for receptions for Zeke to continue to be high, and that touchdowns will come. We see this with a few players every single year. Regression is coming for Elliott.
Positive regression.
Positive regression. Mean reversion, however you want to say it.
All right. Quickly to sum it up, anything else from this game that you want to touch on?
Cedric Wilson was relegated once again with a healthier wide receiver core. You could do worse at his $3,100 price tag. But Dalton Schultz has definitely taken over as a great tight end option. I'm seeing him all the way down. He's way below that top core tight end. At tight end 6, he's still just 6% ownership in projection. And the Awesemo.com projection is a lot rosier than his tight end 10 salary. So that's a great place to look to in this plus matchup.
Great stuff. We're almost there, Matt. We're pretty efficient today. Pretty efficient. We're getting there, man. We got 1 to go here. Hey, hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet, guys. Hate to sound like a broken record on you. I try and keep it to only 2 times a show. It's a 2-hour show, 1 at the beginning, 1 at the end. What can I say? We got 450 people watching. Appreciate all you guys hanging out with us as always. And remember, coming up later in the day, we've got so much content. 7:20, Alex Awesemo Baker and Kyle Dvorak are doing the NFL Showdown Live Before Lock show, making that happen. And MLB Live Before Lock coming up immediately after this at 1 p.m. It's Jay Kari. It's Terry McBride with what's going to be a great show, NBA or MLB playoffs in full swing. So be sure to stick around for that. And then at 2 o'clock, the FanDuel DFS strategy show with Matt Kajeski and Kyle Dvorak. Just everything popping today on the Awesemo.com YouTube channel, which is why I said subscribe, hit that notification bell. It's a great decision. All right, Matt, we got about 5 minutes to go here. And then we got ourselves what we call in the business a hard out. Ooh. Cleveland, Indianapolis. What are we doing with Kareem Hunt? That's the biggest question here. They're 1.5-point dogs at home, 46-point total. Kareem Hunt, floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the total's down a little bit. It's down from 47.5. It's down at 46.5. And we have to mention that Kareem Hunt is still dealing with injuries. That's why we didn't see him quite as much as you would expect once Nick Chubb went out. He's still being limited in practice, but the fact that he was able to finish week 4 and he's getting in limited practice makes us pretty confident he's going to play here. I really like this Browns running game when it's consolidated to one person overall. I know D'Ernest Johnson got plenty of run last week, but I think that really had to do with game script and game flow. I think in any sort of close game, we're going to see them lean on Kareem Hunt. And, if you're playing season-long leagues, he really could be a league winner if he stays healthy. So in terms of this game, the Colts defense is a defense we need to really start respecting. One player that we didn't speak very highly of in the beginning of the year is Xavier Rhodes, and he is playing at an elite level once again. He has the number 6 overall coverage grade on PFF.com. He's up there with the Fullers, the Bradburys, and Jair Alexander. Not quite there, but well ahead of average in terms of his PFF grade. And they're also at the bottom in terms of running back points allowed above opponent average and wide receiver points below relative to opponent average. So I don't actually see this as a great matchup for any of these weapons, especially compared to last week where Dallas was just giving up as many points as they could. One thing I'll also say is that the Colts don't prefer to push the tempo and they don't prefer to throw the ball downfield that often. They're much happier controlling the game with their running and with their short passing, limiting the mistakes that Phillip Rivers can make. So that leads me to possibly a little bit of Jonathan Taylor or Nyheim Hines. Hines, his projection on Awesemo.com is much higher than the running back 35 salary that he has. And same with Jonathan Taylor. He's in the top 10 in our projections this week, but he's 14th in terms of salary. And looking at just 3% ownership, hey, that could be a really interesting play in a game where technically the Colts are favored. If they get up a touchdown or so, we'll see a ton of touchdowns for him. Can't say I love Phillip Rivers. I just think we know what we're going to get with him. He's quarterback 14 to 28. 60% of the time over the last 2 seasons. So you're just getting a mid-priced, mid-tier quarterback. That's not very exciting without pop weeks in his range of outcome. He's only had a few. And what is there left to say about T.Y. Hilton? It's easy to make a median projection that outpaces his wide receiver 32 salary, but it's getting really hard to trust him. It's getting really, really hard to trust him. I think I'd rather go Zach Pascal almost and just throw the flyer out at $4,600 on DraftKings. He's only 0.3% owned, hoping for a touchdown there or a little bit extra volume. He was the highest targeted Colt last week.
All right. Well said, Matt. Wrapping things up here on the NFL Thursday matchup strategy show. The Indianapolis Colts and Cleveland Browns play at the third slowest and 10th slowest pace, respectively, as you mentioned. I do think there is still value in Kareem Hunt, knowing that Stefanski said he was a little bit banged up last week and he wanted to limit him, didn't really need to throw him back into the fire, even after Chubb went down, because the Dallas Cowboys couldn't stop anyone, including D'Ernest Johnson. So in what I expect to be a competitive game, I have a ton of respect for this Indianapolis defense, no question. Very, very stout, both on the ground and run stopping, and their secondary has done a solid job. Slower games, sure. But I do feel like this could be one of those games where Kareem Hunt just sees an immense workload, a ton of carries, and is involved heavily as a pass catcher, already being their third down back before Nick Chubb went down with that injury. So at 6,500, I have no issues with it whatsoever. I will be paying close attention to ownership this week because, as I pointed out earlier in the show, there are just a lot of good spots that aren't getting a ton of ownership. So if it just so happens that Kareem Hunt comes in at, 14% as he's getting right now, I don't think that's too high of a number. And it's a spot that I'm willing to get to. Matt, 12 up, 12 down, baby. 5 weeks in the books.
Oh, feels good. Feels good. Let's do another 2 hours. Ready to roll.
Thanks to you guys for hanging out with us as always. We appreciate you. We love you. And we will see you back here tomorrow on the Strategy Show. Matt and I, however, will be back next Thursday, week 6 of the Matchup Strategy Show at youtube.com/Awesemo. Stick around. Jay Kari, Terry McBride taking you up to lock with the MLB Live Before Lock show.